If it's Monday, communities in crisis, millions without power, and hundreds still unaccounted for as state, local, and federal officials rush resources to the areas hardest hit by Helene. Plus, Israel expands its attacks after the killing of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, as special forces crossed into Lebanon ahead of a possible ground invasion, despite President Biden's renewed calls for a ceasefire. And we'll get the view from Latino voters in some of the most important presidential battlegrounds, as new polling from NBC News shows Democrats' support with the key voting bloc slipping compared to past elections. Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, and we begin with the widespread devastation and the ongoing disaster response following Hurricane Helene. Right now, authorities are blaming that storm for at least 116 deaths across 4 states. Hundreds remain unaccounted for. Thousands are stuck in shelters. Millions are without power, and some areas remain unreachable. More than a third of the reported deaths are from North Carolina, where more than 2 feet of rain fell in the Asheville area. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell is in Asheville, where President Biden says that she'll remain for, quote, the foreseeable future. She and the North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper are expected to brief the president this hour, and we do expect to hear from President Biden in the Oval Office after he receives that briefing. In neighboring Georgia, at least 25 people have been killed by the storm. Governor Brian Kemp told reporters today that Helene, quote, literally spared no one. In Florida, where Helene made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, entire communities along the state's Big Bend region were just wiped away. Today, in his first public remarks since the storm hit, President Biden vowed to visit some of the most devastated communities while defending his administration's response.
I'm committed to traveling to the impacted areas as soon as possible, but I've been told that it would be disruptive if I did it right now. We will not do that at the risk of diverting or delaying any of the response assets needed to deal with this crisis.
Why weren't you and Vice President Harris here in Washington commanding this weekend?
I was commanding. I was on the phone for at least 2 hours yesterday and the day before as well. I commanded. It's called a telephone. And all my security people.
All this, of course, comes a little more than a month before Election Day, with 2 of the states hardest hit by Helene, North Carolina and Georgia, key battlegrounds for both campaigns. Last night, Vice President Harris posted this image on X, saying that she was being briefed by FEMA and spoke with North Carolina's governor about the rescue and recovery efforts. She changed her schedule to be back in D.C., where we're expecting to hear where she's expecting to visit the FEMA headquarters later today. Former President Trump, meanwhile, is in Georgia right now assessing the damage in Valdosta and continues to criticize the Biden administration's response to the storm. NBC's George Solis has the latest from Asheville, North Carolina.
The death toll, unfortunately, keeps climbing. The number of unaccounted also continues going up. Officials here in Buncombe County saying so far they've received about 11,000 calls for wellness checks, and they're doing about 150 home searches right now. Really just a staggering number of this reality of what's happening here in Asheville. Right now we're standing in the River Arts District. This time yesterday, all of this was still underwater. You can see obviously a lot of it has receded, and now we're hearing from those business owners that are looking at what used to be their businesses, their livelihoods, completely gone. We've been talking to some of the owners here, and you can see the despair on their faces. Many of them not sure what comes next. A lot of them frustrated with the lack of the federal response here on the ground. The other issue, the fact that there's no timeline on when crucial utilities will be turned on, specifically water, many of them hearing different information and different time points. A lot of that has to do with the cell phone service. Now, officials say they did put up a temporary tower that's helping with the situation, but it's spotty still on a good day. So that is a huge, huge concern for people. We're hearing reports of people just banding together to listen to radio reports, to share information. That's how critical things have gotten here on the ground in Asheville. There's still no power in a lot of areas. A lot of regions still cut off from everyone else. We have heard from the White House that President Biden will be here on the ground when he can, when it doesn't impact those search and rescue operations, which are still ongoing at this time. Again, we've been hearing from those residents here, most of them impacted by this storm one way or the other.
All right, George Solis in Asheville, North Carolina. George, thank you for that. Meanwhile, NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson is in Irwin, Tennessee. She joins me now for the view of what is happening there. Priscilla, first, what is the latest on the search for those dozens of people still missing?
Yeah, Ryan. So right now there are more than 150 people who are still unaccounted for. That's according to Tennessee Emergency Management. And at this hour, they have only confirmed 3 people have died from this storm. So there are a lot of people who are worried that that death toll is going to rise given the amount of people who are still unaccounted for. And officials today said that this is no longer a search and rescue effort, but that it is a search and recovery effort. And we heard from families earlier today who showed up at that press conference holding pictures of their loved ones, hoping to get answers from officials and any sort of confirmation from officials, many of them describing the last time that they heard from their loved ones as those floodwaters began to rise, because they were working at a plastic factory when all of this happened. And I want to play a little bit of some of what those folks had to say.
He says that the last communication that he had with her, she said, the water, the water's coming up, it's rising, and we've been trying to call 911, but they already told us that their priority is the hospital. And he says, I don't understand. There's a difference in the platforms, the trailer platform and the hospital. And why was that their priority?
And that hospital they're referencing is the one that you see right behind me, where dozens of people were rescued off the roof of that hospital and evacuated as those floodwaters began to rise. And officials today said that they simply did not have enough resources to get out to everyone who needed to be rescued. And the owner of the plastic factory says that they dismissed employees when they saw the roads and the parking lot beginning to flood. But they claim that there were employees who remained on the property and that those employees got into an 18-wheeler and became trapped, and that it tipped over and 5 of them went missing. So lots of unanswered questions here, and families really just looking for some sort of closure as cleanup is underway. Ryan?
It does seem, Priscilla, that this community was just caught off guard by just how much damage the storm brought. Do they feel like they were prepared enough for what Helene brought?
No, and that was one of the questions that the families were asking earlier. Why wasn't there more of a warning? Like, why didn't anyone tell us that it was going to be like this? And, we have to acknowledge that this does appear to have been a historic event, something that no one has ever seen and perhaps was not expected. Even the hospital said their original plan was to have folks hunker down in the hospital. They did not expect for it to be a situation where they would need to evacuate folks. So certainly lots of questions about if more should have or could have been done to prepare. But right now, the focus really on cleanup and finding all of those people who remain unaccounted for. Ryan?
Okay, Priscilla Thompson, thank you to you and your crew. Stay safe out there. Moments ago, I spoke with Keith Turi, FEMA's Acting Director of Response and Recovery, and I began by asking him about the biggest logistical challenges the agency is facing right now delivering aid to the impacted communities.
Yeah, I think one of the most critical things we're doing right now is making sure that we can get to those communities that need help and support them with our state and local partners. We pre-possessioned assets throughout the region, impacted all the way from Florida up to North Carolina before the storm. And now all of those commodities and assets are moving into the areas. In certain areas like Western North Carolina, obviously there are significant issues with transportation, roads that are out. And so part of the effort is working with the state and the local officials to identify what those areas are for transportation and using air and other means if we need to. And so some positive trends are happening. There were over 400 roads closed in North Carolina just a few days ago, and now we're down to 180. So still progress being made, but still a long way to go. One thing I do want to just stress for folks is that we do have a major disaster declaration declared in Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And so if you need assistance from FEMA, you can register at 1-800-621-3362.
And obviously there are enormous logistical challenges. You mentioned the fact that so many of these roads have been shut down. There's also communications problems, cell towers. Many of these victims don't even have power. So what do you say to some of these victims who still haven't received any aid? And do you have any idea what the estimate is of people who still need that support right now?
Yeah, well, first I'll just say there is a massive effort of local, state, and federal officials across a number of agencies that are working around the clock to help make sure that everyone that needs assistance gets it, particularly in some of those areas that are without communication, without power. We are working with the providers, whether that be cell providers or power providers, to make sure that we can reduce any logistical barriers they have to potential access. We're actually bringing satellite communications, Starlink communications into a number of areas to make sure that they can get access to local officials. And so, yeah, it's a challenge. We're working through it, and know that the help is on the way for sure.
And do you have an anticipation of how long it'll take to reach every community that's been devastated by the storm at this point?
We don't have an estimate in every community. It's going to take some time, day by day. We're working through in a very coordinated way what that looks like, and that also being helped by the local officials that have an understanding of where those people are and how we can make sure that they get access to them.
And you said that FEMA at one point had 4 search and rescue teams in North Carolina before Helene hit. Should FEMA have had more teams in place, teams in places like Asheville before Friday?
We had over 14 teams staged up and down the East Coast. We had 4 teams that were staged in North Carolina, and that's just the federal teams. That's on top of what the state and local governments already have. And then we had a pipeline already determined to bring more teams in. And so we had rescues that were ongoing. There have been over 800 rescues that have been occurred across in North Carolina and over 1,400 across the entire impacted area. Those search and rescue teams are still out doing access checks, making sure that they can find folks that may need assistance. And so the pipeline of resources is still moving to support those that need it.
Obviously, there's always so much focus on coastal communities as a hurricane is bearing down on the United States, which makes sense. But we obviously are seeing a tremendous amount of devastation in some of these inland communities, particularly in the mountains. Do you think that there's going to be more of a focus on preparing these inland communities when a hurricane comes? Is that a new challenge of hurricane preparedness?
Actually, the rain associated with the tropical system has been a long-standing challenge. I think we are seeing more significant rain events, both in hurricanes and outside of hurricanes. But there have been a number of storms over the years that have created significant inland flooding risks, and our partners at the Weather Service helped forecast that in advance. And that's why we were able to pre-position resources in all of these inland states that may have needed some assistance. Even the storm was coming up through the Big Bend, we knew that Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina were going to be impacted, and that helped in the preparedness efforts.
And if you can give us an idea of what your resource allocation efforts are like right now, there are already members of Congress suggesting that perhaps Congress will have to return to session before the election to provide more funding for FEMA and these agencies that are helping with the recovery. Is there any way to tell whether or not you're going to have the resources necessary to help the need that's kind of grown out of this storm?
Yeah, we have the resources that we need today to make sure that we're handling this response and for the weeks ahead. Big disasters like this, they always typically will create a range of requirements across a number of federal agencies. And I know that's something that we'll be working with others on moving forward. But for today, we have what we need to handle this response and to make sure that we're helping everyone who needs it.
All right, you guys have a tremendous amount of work ahead of you. Keith Turi, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And coming up, Israeli forces focus their firepower on Lebanon as the region reels from the death of Hezbollah's powerful leader. Live reports from northern Israel and the Pentagon are straight ahead. But first, former President Trump heads to Georgia to assess some of the damage from Helene and rally political support with just 36 days until the election. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier, Donald Trump is on the ground right now in Georgia, where he assessed some of the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene. The former president has been outspoken in his criticism of the Biden administration for its response to this disaster. He continued those attacks today.
The governor's doing a very good job. He's having a hard time getting the president on the phone. I guess they're not being responsive. The federal government is not being responsive, but they're having a very hard time getting the president on the phone. He won't get on, and of course the vice president, she's out someplace campaigning, looking for money.
Now, we should note that none of that is true. Governor Brian Kemp said today that he had spoken with President Biden yesterday and that the president had asked what he needed. Kemp's also said that he responded, "We've got what we need. We'll work through the federal process." As we noted earlier, Vice President Harris left the trail today to head back to Washington for a briefing at FEMA headquarters later today. For more now, I'm joined by NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake in Valdosta, Georgia. Also with me is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. So, Garrett, let's start with you. Donald Trump, one side of his mouth is saying that this isn't political, that he's just worried about the people of this community being taken care of. But then on the other end of it, he's hammering the Biden administration, looping in his opponent, Kamala Harris, to all of this by actually saying things that are not true. Why does his campaign think that this is a winning strategy? And is it not his campaign? Maybe this is just Donald Trump being Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's always hard to separate the two in these moments, Ryan, but of course this is political. And I think Donald Trump and his campaign realized over the weekend they had a bit of an opportunity because it looked like the administration was out of position. Kamala Harris was on the wrong coast raising money. Joe Biden was at his beach house. It's not a good look, and I think they thought they could capitalize on that on Saturday and Sunday. But Donald Trump knows as well as anybody that the idea of the president or vice president coming to a disaster zone in the immediate wake of that disaster is far more disruptive than helpful. And I think he tried to split the difference today coming to Valdosta, Georgia, where there is some damage, but this is not by any stretch of the imagination one of the hardest hit places, and kind of get credit for feeling the feelings, for feeling the pain of what are in many cases his voters in pretty Republican-leaning areas. He was with Samaritan's Purse, an aid group with Franklin Graham, kind of comes down, looks like he's doing the part to help out. But the challenge is either to the federal government response or the president being out of touch. None of that stuff withstands scrutiny or fact-checking. But for Trump, it may not have to, right? This is probably all going to get washed out by the VP debate tomorrow anyway. So they score a few cheap points while they can, and then they move on.
Yeah, Trump also accused North Carolina's Democratic Governor Roy Cooper of going out of his way not to help the Republican areas impacted by Helene. I know that you specifically pressed him on this. Is this something that could backfire in a state that Trump likely needs to win? Or is he betting that people who are hurting are just going to believe something that isn't really that true?
I tried to press him, Ryan, and this is one of those tricky ones where Trump gave a typical kind of non-response. I asked him what evidence he had for this, where he was getting this, and he said, oh, go take a look. Like, that's not an answer, and it's not something you can go verifiably prove or disprove. I'm not sure that we should ascribe a strategy to this. I mean, this feels much more like one of those things where you just kind of muddy the water and hope that at least some people in his coalition, or the people he wants to be in his coalition, who you remember, largely are disengaged politically, they're men, they're younger men who may not be paying that close of attention, might see or hear this and at least for a moment feel it in one of those areas, and maybe they're more likely to come out and pull a lever for Trump. But, this is like a triple bank shot to be anything that sounds like a real electoral strategy here. It's more just be on the attack in every conceivable way you can be on the attack, which is at the core of Donald Trump's political philosophy.
And I know you've covered plenty of these disasters before, Garrett. Just quickly, what's your sense of how long it would take before the conditions would be able to sustain a presidential visit?
Yeah, look, it depends on where you want to go. I mean, here where I am in Valdosta, the roads are open. You can get around. Some places have power. Some places don't. I think you could probably have the president on the ground here in a day or two. If you're talking about North Carolina, maybe the end of the week, you need the floodwaters to go down. You need electricity, and you need working roads. I mean, that's the biggest part of this. This is not a one-car parade here that comes in, especially with the president, when you have a multi-car motorcade, the ability to move quickly. I'm not on the ground in North Carolina, but I think there's still at least a couple days away of being able to support that logistically.
Okay, Garrett, thank you for that. Gabe, let's go to you now. The president has said that he's planning on visiting these impacted areas later in the week. Has the White House given any indication specifically as to how soon that might happen?
Well, Ryan, the president said earlier today that he hopes to make it to North Carolina potentially by Wednesday or Thursday. But again, he stressed that he would only do so if he could be guaranteed that he wasn't disrupting any of the emergency response there. Now, President Biden is right now in the Oval Office getting a briefing from his Homeland Security advisor and also from the FEMA administrator who is on the ground right now in North Carolina. The White House, during its briefing a short time ago, tried to really emphasize what the federal government was doing to help the people of North Carolina, Georgia, and the other affected states, saying more than 3,600 federal employees were deployed there on the ground. But as you just heard Garrett say, the White House is very quick to point out that the president did speak with Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia yesterday and is really trying to heighten its response, or at least the optics of the response. They had President Biden come out and give remarks this morning, and we expect to hear from him in just a short time in the Oval Office. Ryan.
And that is, of course, the president's plans. But what about Vice President Harris? Should we expect her to visit some of these communities?
Well, that is a question right now. The campaign hasn't said when she might go. Similar to what the White House has been saying about the president, the campaign says she will only go once she is told that she can go there safely and without disrupting the emergency operations on the ground. But as you said, the vice president was fundraising over the weekend and cut her West Coast swing short today, rushing back here to D.C. in just a few minutes. She's set to get a briefing over at FEMA headquarters, Ryan.
Okay, Gabe, thank you for that. Coming up, what's next for Israel, Hezbollah, and the entire region as the Israeli military ramps up its fight against Iran-based militants and prepares for a potential ground invasion of Lebanon. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Israel is expanding its attacks on Iranian-backed militant groups across the Mideast today, just days after killing Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in an airstrike in Beirut. And multiple sources now tell NBC News that Israel's planning a limited ground operation into Lebanon that could begin as soon as today. Those sources say Israel was planning a larger invasion, but after extensive conversations with U.S. officials over the weekend, Israel decided to scale things back. The White House, however, does remain concerned that the conflict could expand. Here's what the president said earlier today.
Well, just the fact that Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plans?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now.
Joining me now is Raf Sanchez. He's in Haifa, Israel, and in a moment I'll be joined by Courtney Kuby, who is at the Pentagon. So, Raf, what more are we learning about Israel's ground incursion into Lebanon?
Ryan, multiple sources tell NBC News that this ground offensive could begin at any time, and I can tell you it feels on this side of the border like things are starting to move very, very quickly. In just the last couple of hours, the Israeli military has declared a closed military zone along the eastern edge of the Israel-Lebanon border. At the same time, Lebanese media is reporting intensive Israeli artillery fire in that same area. So we don't know for sure, but early indications appear to be that Israel is planning to begin its ground offensive on that eastern edge of the border. There's been no official confirmation from the Israeli military that a ground assault has begun, and in just the last couple of minutes, the military's chief spokesman has been on social media appealing to the Israeli public not to spread rumors. Now, U.S. officials, other sources, are telling us that Israel is planning a, quote, limited operation over the border into Lebanon. The idea would be to push Hezbollah back from the immediate border to create conditions where displaced Israeli civilians could return to their homes in those border communities. Some 60,000 Israelis have been displaced over the last 11 months. Ryan, the problem that history shows us is that ground operations often begin limited and then they take on a life of their own once the shooting starts. Israeli forces crossed into southern Lebanon back in 1982. That was supposed to be a limited operation to move militants away from Lebanon's border. It turned into a 20-year occupation of southern Lebanon. It saw Israeli forces fighting their way to Beirut and laying siege to the capital of Lebanon. So there is a lot of concern in the White House and in other places that a limited operation won't necessarily stay limited. Now, there are about 1 million displaced Lebanese civilians, mostly from the south of the country, who have fled north to try to get away from the fighting. So it may very well be that most of these villages that Israeli forces will roll into will already be empty. But of course, the deep, deep concern here is that as Israeli forces move into southern Lebanon, you could see civilian casualties on a much larger scale. Some 1,100 Lebanese have been killed in the last 2 weeks since those pagers started going off, and then these intensified Israeli airstrikes. We don't know how many of those are Hezbollah fighters. Israel says it is giving warnings to try to get civilians out of harm's way, and we are seeing more of those warnings being issued tonight to residents of southern Beirut, telling them to get away from areas that Israel is planning to target.
And
Ryan.
And Raf, you touched on how the Prime Minister Netanyahu has vowed to return Israeli residents back to their homes in the north, which is a complicated process. How are people in Israel reacting to that potential second front in the war?
It's a really good question, Ryan. There's a lot of fear. Hezbollah is a much stronger enemy than Hamas. They had well over 100,000 missiles, rocket drones going into this war. So far, they seem only to have been able to fire those weapons at a fairly limited rate. There's been some surprise, actually, that the skies of northern cities like Haifa, where we are now, aren't more full of Hezbollah rockets. That appears to be a sign that Hezbollah is really on the back foot after these relentless series of Israeli blows. I can tell you, among a lot of people in northern Israel, they feel that this was long overdue, that they've been out of their homes for 11 months, that they wanted to see their government take firm action to make the situation safe. But I can also tell you, a lot of people are skeptical that this is going to work. We met one father whose paratrooper son was killed on October 7th. He was forced to evacuate with his family from their home in the north the next day. And he told us he isn't sure this is going to work and that his family will be able to go home safely. Right.
Okay, Raf Sanchez, thank you for that update. Stay safe where you are. Let's now go to the Pentagon, where Courtney Cubia is standing by. And Courtney, I understand you have some new reporting out of the region. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is in the region. It's not directly related to Israel, but we now know, according to 3 defense officials, that the Houthis, which is the Iranian-backed militia group in Yemen, have downed a U.S. MQ-9 drone. Now, this is not the first time. In fact, we know of at least a half dozen times that drones like this, MQ-9s, these are U.S. military drones, have been downed or have been impacted by the Houthis. In fact, Ryan, we had some reporting recently that Iran is helping the Houthis to target these drones. This is millions of dollars in U.S. military assets. But not just that. When the drones are taken out by the Houthis, it also impacts the U.S. ability to gather information, to gather intelligence about them, and it can impact potential strikes. Because remember, these drones are actually capable of conducting airstrikes as well, Ryan.
And some experts are saying that Israel likely used an American-made 2,000-pound bunker buster bomb to take out Nasrallah. What more do we know about that, and how is the Pentagon adjusting its posture in the region?
Yeah, so the U.S. is not saying that's the case, but when you look at the battle damage and you look at the pictures and the video coming out of there, it seems that that's the most likely weapon that was used here and that it would have been provided by the U.S. Now, the U.S. generally has a hard time because there's rarely end-user agreements, or it's not like the Israelis have to tell the Americans before they use these sorts of weapons or equipment in a combat situation. But the concern here is that if U.S. weapons, or when U.S. weapons are used in these sorts of strikes, that it only fuels what is an Iranian belief that the U.S. is complicit or helping Israel in strikes like this. Now, the U.S., the Biden administration, for their part, has foot stomped time and time again that they were not aware of this operation to kill Hassan Nasrallah last week, that in fact that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was informed as the operation was underway and that the U.S. had no advanced knowledge of it, Ryan.
And tell me what the Pentagon's thinking now is about the dynamics in the region after the killing of Nasrallah. Have things significantly changed, or Iran's proxy groups seriously weakened since October 7th? Give us kind of the 30,000-foot view here. I
got to tell you, Ryan, it's pretty remarkable when you look back to October 7th versus where you are now and how the proxy groups have been impacted. Hamas, much of their leadership, I mean, look at what has happened in Gaza. They have been largely taken out. Much of their weapons stockpile have been taken out. But Hezbollah, what we have seen happen with Hezbollah over the last 2 weeks is stunning. The Israelis have had a tremendous amount of intelligence information that they have worked with and slowly and strategically acted on over months. Even when you go back even to the killing of Hania back in July in Iran, these have been long-term carried out operations that have taken out Hezbollah and Hamas's leadership, their command and control. They have been severely weakened. Now, we're talking about core Hamas and core Hezbollah here. When you look to some of the groups that are in Iraq and in Syria, even the Houthis in Yemen, they still have the ability to carry out smaller attacks, more regional attacks within the areas where they operate. Iran has continued to train them, to provide money, to provide weapons over the course of the last several months. There's no indication that they are weakened, but I think it's very telling that we have not seen them act. So we have not seen a tremendous uptick in activity in Iraq or Syria since the Hania killing. We've not seen anything yet since Nasrallah, but that's really where we need to be looking to see if there's any additional activity from those regional militia groups. Ryan.
Okay, Courtney Hubie, thank you for that. Let's now bring in Bilal Saab, who's the head of the U.S. Middle East practice at Trends Research and Advisory. Bilal, U.S. officials have told NBC News that Israel's operations in Lebanon will be limited in scope. They expect them to last days, not weeks. But given how we've seen this war unfold in Gaza, does the administration really have any means to get Israel to commit to that and eventually choose a diplomatic path forward?
Yeah, good question, Ryan, and good to be with you. My confidence level, probably like yours, is not very high, frankly, in our ability to apply any kind of pressure, to issue recommendations to the Israelis. All we've been doing, frankly, over the past few weeks and months is express concerns, which obviously is not that effective. So the ground invasion is now a matter of when, not if, and then how it unfolds. Obviously, nobody knows. The very mission itself of the ground invasion is still unclear, frankly, even in the minds of the Israelis. Are you there to create a buffer zone? Are you there to further degrade the military infrastructure of Hezbollah? When will you incorporate some diplomacy into this entire equation? We don't have the answers to any of those things, and all of that is happening in the absence of U.S. diplomacy, at least serious U.S. diplomacy.
And I know you said you can't predict what a potential ground invasion might look like, but just give us an idea of what we could expect. Would it look anything like Israel's 2006 invasion? Does that provide us any insight?
In the words of the Israelis, they say, no, this is not going to look like 2006, more like sort of clean up as many areas as possible, as close to the borders of Lebanon, probably take out a few more weapons depots, some military infrastructure, and then come back in. Right now, what you're seeing probably as we speak, some preparatory fires, some airstrikes in order to facilitate a ground incursion through special forces first, to further clean up those areas, and then with something a bit more conventional significant. Look, there's a very high risk of mission creep, as you very well know. It could start with something limited, but then get either ambitious or actually get bogged down, which will force the Israelis to come up with something more extensive, more expansive.
I want to read a portion of what you wrote today about Hassan Nasrallah. You say, quote, "It is no exaggeration to say that he was the brain, the spinal cord, and the beating heart of Hezbollah. Without him, it's very hard to see how Hezbollah will think, move, and inspire the way it did before an Israeli fighter jet struck Nasrallah's bunker." So what is next for Hezbollah? Who's in line to succeed Nasrallah? And how diminished is that militant group today?
It's always surreal when I look at the words that I actually express myself. Look, they're in the midst, obviously, of figuring out who's going to succeed the Secretary General. Obviously, these are impossible shoes to fill. This is no ordinary man, as you can imagine. He had influence that extended beyond Lebanon's borders. There's a technical process for succession in the organization through the Shura Council, which is the sort of decision-making body. But then there's obviously the politics of it all, and they're in the midst of trying to figure out who's the best candidate to lead the organization at a time that is probably the most dangerous throughout the entire history of the organization, right? They're in an active war right now. The leadership is decimated, both politically and militarily speaking. I'm not even sure about the partnership that they have with the Iranians. There's a huge question mark there. We haven't really seen the Iranians support them that much throughout this conflict. And so whoever's going to step up is already had they're a target, right? And I don't know how much longer, frankly, they would survive as the leader of the organization. Look, just like the Israelis, they learned a few lessons from 2006, so they're not helpless. And Courtney, it's always difficult to go after Courtney because she's very smart and she always has impeccable insights. She's right. There's still more than 100,000 fighters, right? Those are the foot soldiers. Yes, they're not getting the right kind of command and leadership at this point, but they're still there, right? And so it's an organization that still has some capabilities, and we don't know how it's going to react to this entire situation, right? But that doesn't mean that they're going to fold. It's not part of their DNA. It's not part of their philosophy. So we're going to wait and see. They have an advantage on because they know the terrain now, if there is an invasion. So we'll see that tit for tat, what it's going to lead to.
Okay, Bilal Saab, thank you so much for your insight and expertise. We appreciate it very much. Coming up, we'll hear directly from Latino voters in two critical battleground states and dig into brand new NBC polling on the state of the race for the White House. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Let's turn now back to the presidential election, and that's where we have some new poll numbers looking at the key demographics this November, Latino voters. Vice President Harris does lead former President Trump by 14 points among Latino voters in a new poll from NBC News, CNBC, and Telemundo. While Harris' lead is an improvement from President Biden's standing when he was at the top of the ticket, it's also a lot smaller than the margin that Democrats have won Latinos by in past elections. According to historical NBC News exit poll data, Democrats' lead with Latinos has been shrinking since 2012. This new polling also shows just how politically diverse and divided Latino voters are. The results among Latinos mirror many of the trends we're seeing in the country at large, especially when it comes to gender. Harris has a 26-point lead among Latinas, while Harris and Trump are tied among Latino men. NBC News correspondent David Noriega is talking to Latino voters in Clark County, Nevada, which is the main population center in that state. And Telemundo's senior Washington correspondent Christine Ladoña is in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a town with a growing Latino population. David, let's start with you. You're talking to Latino voters in Las Vegas. What are they telling you?
Yeah, Ryan, so I am specifically on Las Vegas's east side, which is the predominantly Latino part of the city. And I've been talking to voters here for a couple of days, and what I'm hearing really reflects that national polling in a couple of ways. First of all, this community is really torn between the parties and torn between the candidates in a way that they haven't been in several election cycles. You can see this community really going both ways. Additionally, the one thing that is pretty universally true when I talk to voters about what matters to them is that the first thing they mention is the cost of living and the economy. We were at a park very close to where I am now, talking to parents who were watching their kids play in a youth soccer league. That's where I met Griselda Martinez. She moved to Nevada from California about 20 years ago. She told me that she's about 60-40 leaning towards Trump, but that she is persuadable, and that if the Harris campaign reaches her and talks to her in a convincing way about the economy and the cost of living, they could still win her vote. I want to play you a little bit of what she told me. Take a listen.
I love what Donald Trump did for us as an economy while he was in presidency, and I don't know what she has to offer because she's new. So that's kind of like taking a chance on her, you know, so that's what I mean. But I do like how she is doing a lot of things for small businesses and how she has that idea for them. I do like that about her.
What are the most important issues for you?
Family income, you know, just the cost of living. I want to be able to support myself and my children and be able to do things, you know, and that's what's important to me. I know that there's a lot of bigger issues, but those issues don't affect me and my family and how I'm living right now.
Voters like Griselda, Ryan, are exactly why the campaigns, and particularly the Harris campaign, are spending tremendous amounts of money trying to find and reach these specific voters, this relatively narrow slice of this one demographic, particularly in southwestern swing states like Arizona and like here in Nevada. Ryan?
Okay, thank you for that, David. Let's go to you, Christina. You're in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Wilkes-Barre in Luzerne County. It's a place that's been going through a bit of a shift in demographics and politics. So tell us why you're there.
Well, Ryan, it's part of the Latino belt in northeastern Pennsylvania. Here in Hazleton, the majority of the population is Latino. It was 5% 20 years ago, and now 63% of them are Latino, mostly Dominicans. And they're not, here the Democrats do not have the advantage. What we have spoken to people, they have told us most of them are planning on voting for Donald Trump. They voted for him. The majority of them did in the past two elections. He won by 3 points. 8 years ago and then by 11.4 years ago, and we're still thinking that they may give him greater numbers come November. And also the divide is like David was talking about. It's depending on the issues. Those voters that are voting with their pocketbook are leaning towards Trump. The other ones that are voting with the heart, with democracy and values issues, say that they're on the side of Harris. And we also saw a divide in gender and religion. Let's take a listen. What are the issues that move you towards Trump and move you and your community towards Donald Trump?
Well, mainly is the transgender, and also the abortion right.
And you would say most of your community is choosing Donald Trump because of that?
Yes, yes. The majority, yes.
What is it about Kamala Harris's values that entices you? Why are you with her?
I'm with Kamala Harris because she values what women value. She values women's rights. I feel that we have a safer place with her in terms of bodily autonomy, other reasons why as well.
Another big issue that is being debated here in the streets of Hazleton are Trump's growing attacks on some of the immigrants that are crossing the borders. On Saturday, he said, once again, some of them are animals and some of them, of the immigrant criminals, break into your kitchen and cut your throat. So the Democrat leaning voters are saying they cannot support a candidate like that. They're worried he's actually poisoning the feel of the country. They don't want that hatred moving forward for their kids and their grandchildren. But the Trump supporters are saying, I am not an animal. He's not talking about me. I am not a criminal. This is not directed at me. Very different reactions, Ryan, and we'll see what plays out November 5th.
Okay, Christina, we know one thing is for sure. The Latino vote is going to be so important in this upcoming election. We appreciate that reporting. After the break, we're counting down to tomorrow night's vice presidential debate as Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance prepare to face off. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We're just over 24 hours until one of the final pre-election dates on the 2024 calendar, the vice presidential debate. Tim Walz and J.D. Vance are set to meet on stage tomorrow night in New York. Both candidates are largely off the trail today, putting in some last-minute debate prep. Joining me now on set is Betsy Woodruff-Swan, who's a national correspondent for Politico, Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher, he's also an NBC News political analyst, and Republican strategist Garrett Ventry. Betsy, normally I would say a vice presidential debate maybe has 24 hours worth of legs before we move on to the next thing. But the fact that we don't have another debate coming up, does that put a little bit more stock in what we're going to see tomorrow night?
I think you could argue that. That's the last time we're going to see.
You don't seem that convinced, Betsy. Yeah. I'm going to be honest.
Ryan, you're not crazy. Look, it's not as exciting as a presidential. It just isn't. The biggest issue tomorrow night is, does anyone theatrically faceplant? Is there like a total disaster episode that we see unfold? If it's moderately boring and unexpected, then I think we all kind of move on. One fun fact about this debate coming up. Based on my analysis, I'm 99% sure I'm correct about this. Tim Walz is the first non-lawyer in about 20 years to be on a Democratic presidential ticket.
Wow.
And J.D. Vance is the first lawyer in about the same period of time to be on a Republican presidential ticket. And so in the debate context, that's kind of fun because lawyers, of course, are trained very much in this particular mode of arguing. And the tables are going to be sort of reversed than the way they have been for, I want to say at least 20 years.
Wow, that's fun facts you bring to the table. I like it. Very good. Cornell, I want to show you some net favorability numbers from our latest NBC News poll. Shows that Tim Walz has a pretty good favorability rating. In fact, of all the people running for president, his is the best right now. That might have something to do with the fact that not a lot of people know him. But he hasn't really done much media since he was named to the ticket. Not very many interviews. He's not even doing like kind of the local interviews that some of these vice presidential candidates do. Is part of that because they don't want to hurt that favorability number and that it's just too risky to do that? Or what's the strategy here?
Well, look, I'll go back to this point. Look, he's not a lawyer. He's a school teacher, right? You know, next to nurses and firemen, you know who Americans really like? They really like school teachers.
Not TV news anchors.
I like you well enough. But look, he's sort of a regular guy, and I think sort of that regular guy persona comes across to voters. Look, don't underestimate favorables, because look, in the end, we'll make a lot of conversation about policy, and you'll do a lot of reporting about policy. And the average American, in the end, this is what George Bush had in Oodles. I just like him. He seems like a good man. Don't underestimate how powerful it is that both of these candidates have above water favorables, particularly in a time where we're so polarized.
All right, I do want to go back to this point about how Walz has largely stopped doing media interviews. And Garrett, I'm going to read part of this piece by Mark Leibovitz in the New Atlantic article. It says, it's a bit of a mystery why Walz has largely stopped doing national media, especially given how effective he was over the summer. The campaign seems to have trapped him in the same hyper-protective bubble wrap it placed around Harris, and that was placed around Biden before her. This strikes me as a massive waste of Walz's talents. But what do I know? Are you surprised, especially given the fact J.D. Vance is doing interviews everywhere? It seems as though he'll take an interview whenever anyone asks. What do you make of this strategy of putting Walz on the sideline?
I do think it's interesting because I think a lot of the reason he came on people's radar for the job was because he was doing media every single night when he was campaigning for the vice president. So I find that very interesting. Now, I think if you take a step back, how does this play out in debate? I think there's two things here. One, it's the most eyeballs that both of these candidates are going to have. But two, I mean, the essential job of a VP is do no harm, right? So that's it here. And so I think this isn't going to matter as much as the presidential. Now, when you're looking at Vance here, I think he has a slight advantage because he's doing a lot of media. And he's not only just going on Fox News, he's doing NBC, he's doing CNN, ABC, CBS. So that gives him an advantage, and he's doing press conferences. So I think at the bottom line, a win in this debate is this. Nobody's really voting for the top of the ticket based on the bottom of the ticket. It's can you tie negatives on the bottom of the ticket to the top of the ticket. So for JD, can he tie immigration and economic issues to Harris that are negative about Walz? And for Walz, can he do it on abortion, democracy, health care, and tying those things on JD to Trump? Whoever does that better will ultimately win the debate.
And so do you think that'll be the strategy then, Garrett, to kind of talk about the tickets fulsome and their policy issues? Or should we expect J.D. Vance to go after Tim Walz's military record?
I think you will. I mean, listen, that's going to be, those are the two things. J.D. is going to have to answer for the Springfield, Ohio comments with Haitian migrants, right? He's going to have to answer for that. And Walz is going to have to answer on what people feel like that he's misled on his military record. So I think he will attack him on that, but it is if you're not going after the top of the ticket as the VP candidate, you're really missing an opportunity because that's what people are really voting for.
Time for me to jump. I completely agree with my Republican colleague. I will say this one thing. I think Vance has to change the dynamics that's happening right now. If you look at most of the polling, and even on average right now, it seems to be trending, and has been for over a month now, trending in favor of Harris Walz. The other part of this, whenever I have a candidate who's in a debate and I know they're trailing, you have to shake up the dynamics of this race. If you don't shake up the dynamics of this race and continue this trajectory, we're likely to lose.
Okay, let's turn now and talk about this Latino poll that NBC News has commissioned this week. And Betsy, I'm going to turn to you now. It shows that Kamala Harris is up, but man, this is a much tighter race in terms of Latino vote that we've seen over the 2-3 past election cycles. What I think we're all coming to learn is that Latino voters are not a monolith. In fact, they seem to mirror the rest of the country quite a bit. But how does the Harris campaign target this vote, which is going to be so important to them in being successful?
What's interesting about this poll is that it shows dramatic differences when you break down this massive portion of the electorate. One thing that jumped out to me was a huge discrepancy between how Catholic Latino voters versus how evangelical Latinos vote. Evangelicals are much more favorable to Trump. The Catholics are significantly more favorable to Harris. One area where Harris's team sees room to gain and room to improve their standing is with evangelical voters. That's traditionally for Trump. He's very much viewed that, in particular white evangelicals, as his home turf. But we've seen Harris's team invest more in trying to sort of explicitly court
evangelical voters, and that's something where potentially she could see benefits or at least room to marginally move the needle going into November.
And Cornell, were you surprised that the gender gap for Latino voters is very similar to the way it is with the rest of the country?
No, because that's the way it's been. That's the way it's been moving. Look, I actually, at some point, it's battleground by battleground. Look, to think of the Latino vote as monolith, I know you said it before, but it's huge difference. Like Puerto Ricans are very different from Cubans, and Cubans are very different from Mexicans. And sort of from you look from a battleground state, let's go to Nevada, let's go to Arizona, like those populations are different than the populations that you see in Florida. So I'm at the point now where I don't even like looking at a Latino poll, right? I'd much rather look at battleground states, sort of Latino or Hispanic voters in those battleground states, because they're so dramatically different from outside the battleground states.
And what about the Trump campaign? What have they done right to try and close this gap?
What you're talking about, it's a seismic shift. You're talking about 20, 30-point shift to Trump. The other problem for her, real quick, I know we've got to wrap up, is that she is underperforming where Hillary was in the polls in 2016 and where Biden was in 2020 in key swing states. That is a current trajectory that is good for Trump, not for Harris.
All right, we got to go. Betsy, Cornell, Garrett, thank you all for being here. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.